What is up, everyone? It's Quinn here, and I have a zero RB draft strategy video for you guys today. So I know the zero RB draft strategy is heavily criticized. I know a lot of people are very, very against it. And to be totally honest, it's not a strategy that I use a ton. But I do think there are spots where if value is available at other positions and your league mates are just, sucking all the running backs out of the draft pool, I'm definitely not opposed to going zero RB at some points. But remember, I always have to preface these draft strategy videos with this. You should never go into a draft with one strategy. Like, I will never go into a draft saying, I'm going to go zero RB. It just doesn't make any sense. You're locking yourself into a strategy, especially with zero RB. You're just straight up fading a position. But if the value's there, you should totally take a running back. This is only for when, through your first few rounds, you've gone best player available, and it's just like no running backs were in those spots. So like I always say, you should go best player available, and then you figure it out from there after the first 3 or 4 rounds. So now getting into the zero RB draft strategy, first off, when you should use it. Because I feel like zero RB is the one strategy where in certain league settings, it should just not even be on the table. So first off, you're going to have to be in a PPR or half PPR league to execute this. You really just don't want to do it in standard because these half-point PPR leagues, they put more of a focus on the wide receivers, which is obviously going to be a strong position if you're going zero RB. And then you should be able to start at least 4 wide receivers. So 4 more wide receivers in your starting lineup. This could be a 2 wide receiver, 2 flex league. This could be a 3 wide receiver, 1 flex league. It could be, 3 wide receivers, 2 flexes. Whatever it is, you want to be able to start at least 4 wide receivers in your offense. In your standard league format, you're going to see on ESPN, I think Yahoo also, where it's 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers, 1 flex. Zero RB just doesn't make a ton of sense because there's not enough wide receiver spots to kind of warrant just punting the running back position. So now diving into actually the roster construction of a zero RB team, hence the name. Zero RB involves pretty much punting the running back position, I would say typically through the dead zone, which would be round 6. So I think typically you'd be getting your first running back round 7, 8, 9, somewhere in there. And then the idea is that your zero RB teams should pretty much dominate everywhere outside the running back position. If you're punting the RB position, you want every other spot to be pretty solid. You should have strong wide receiver options through the flex, plus 1 or 2 solid bench options. And then personally, I think you need to have at least a mid-tier quarterback and or tight end. So you don't necessarily have to have a Josh Allen, a Jalen Hurts, or a Travis Kelce, a Mark Andrews, but you at least want a mid-tier option or above. For the tight ends, that would be a Darren Waller, a George Kittle, a TJ Hawkinson. For quarterbacks, that would be a Justin Herbert, a Trevor Lawrence, guys like that. And personally, I prefer having a mid-tier option or better for both those positions. I just think if you're punting the running back position, you really want to dominate at wide receiver, you want to dominate at quarterback, and you want to dominate at tight ends. And then once you get past that running back dead zone, you're typically going to just be hammering the running back position in the later rounds. You're also likely going to be targeting ambiguous backfields, right? Once you get into that round 7, 8, 9 area, there's not a ton of sure things at the position, but there are running backs that are in, supposed committees who could end up breaking out and being really strong options for you. And then also in the later rounds, you probably just want to be firing a ton of darts at committee options who may be able to take over later on in the season or fill in for certain weeks. And I do think some people just hate the zero RB strategy because when you look at your starting lineup heading into week 1, it may not look that great, right? Because if you punted the running back position, your running back 1 may be an okay option. It might be a high-end RB3 in the grand scheme of things, but your running back 2 probably isn't going to look great. You probably have some decent wide receivers on the bench, so it just doesn't seem like your team is super well constructed. But the appeal to zero RB is that your teams actually build throughout the season, whereas other teams kind of regress. So the RB position is very fragile, it's very injury prone. So you're going to have these other teams that go early RB. Some of those running backs are going to get injured. Those teams are going to fall off, whereas your team is going to build now because you have those handcuffs, you have those players in ambiguous situations to kind of upgrade your roster. Plus, you have the wide receiver depth to kind of maintain the wide receivers and flex positions throughout the season. So that is pretty much the upside of drafting zero RB. Like I said at the top, it's not a strategy I go to a ton. I do like getting one or two running backs in those first few rounds, but it's also not a strategy I'm just going to completely throw away, right? Like if there's no running back value, I'm not going to force it if, my league kind of fits these standards where I could be starting 4 or 5 wide receivers and it's half point PPR or PPR scoring. Now I'm going to be jumping into 5 different mock drafts from 5 different positions to show you guys, how your zero RB teams could kind of shake out here. So let's jump into the first one. This is going to be from the first overall pick. PPR scoring and looking at the roster construction, decently normal. 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers, 2 flex options, and then 5 bench, and then obviously 1 quarterback, 1 tight end. So from the 101, I kind of feel like this 101 pick is a spot where zero RB does kind of work because I think a lot of the good running backs could kind of get picked earlier in the second round. You have a really strong 101 with Justin Jefferson, which is who we took there. And then I think the 4-5 turn is also pretty interesting for zero RB. There's typically not a ton of running backs, if any, that I like picking in that spot. So we're going to start off this draft with Justin Jefferson at the 101. I think a very strong pick. He is my best player available. Then at the 2-3 turn, now we could have gone with a running back like Ramondre. I pretty much have all these guys in the same tier. Guys like Chubb, Pollard, Derrick Henry, all of them were off the board. So I go with Jalen Waddle and Mark Andrews. These are guys I view as back-end wide receiver 2 picks, or back-end round 2 picks. So we get our wide receiver 2 with Jalen Waddle, and then we get a stud tight end 1 to dominate one of those other positions, quarterback and tight end. So we get Andrews there. Then we get to the 4-5 turn, and like I said, this is not a spot where I like going running back. The guys before us were picked Miles Sanders and Dameon Pierce. Like those are not guys I'm considering in round 4. So at the 4-5 turn, we get Amari Cooper, who I would take in the late 3rd round. So I love the value there. And then we get an elite option at the quarterback position with Justin Herbert. I think the value makes sense there. That's pretty much where I have him in my rankings. So through 5 rounds, we have 3 wide receivers, and then we have an elite quarterback and elite tight end option. And I really don't think we passed on any crazy value at the running back position. It's just kind of how the draft played out, which is a point I'm going to continue to emphasize. Then heading into round 6, we get Deontay Johnson to be our wide receiver 4, which I think is a pretty fair price. And then we get into round 7, and I think this is the spot where we probably want to take our shot on our first running back here. I think the running back pool really kind of fades out after this spot. You get to round 6, round 7, that's where you're going to see a lot of guys in the tier of James Conner, Javonte Williams, Rashad White, James Cook, all of those guys. That's where they start to come off the board. And then once you get to the round 8, they're typically not going to be available. So at the 701, I went with Javonte Williams. This could have been a Rashad White pick. This could have been a James Cook pick. I just prefer Javonte Williams. He's cleared to practice. We're expected to see him in the preseason. So I definitely think he's interesting to be our running back 1. Then in round 8, we get another wide receiver with Quentin Johnston. So he's going to be our wide receiver 5, creating a lot of solid wide receiver depth. And we also stack him to Justin Herbert, our quarterback. Same team. If Herbert's doing well, Quentin Johnston is probably doing well also. And then in the last 5 rounds, this is where we just start to kind of hammer the running back position. So we go with Zach Charbonnet in round 9. I talked pretty extensively about Zach Charbonnet in my must-draft handcuff video. I just really like him as an option this year. I think he will have some week-to-week value, but then he also has RB1 upside if Kenneth Walker goes down. And then we go with Damian Harris in round 10, a guy in an ambiguous situation. Who knows what's going to happen with him and James Cook and their split. And then I get Rashad Bateman as a really nice value in round 11 to be our wide receiver 6, and then finish it up with 2 handcuffs, Jaylen Warren and Kendre Miller. So if you're looking at this team, you can see we pretty much dominated everywhere but the running back position, right? We have a really strong quarterback. Our wide receivers are really nice. Justin Jefferson, Jalen Waddle, those are 2 guys that I would consider to be top 12 options. Then we have Amari Cooper, who I think is like a mid to high end wide receiver 2. And then Deontay, who's a really solid wide receiver 3, but is slotting in as our wide receiver 4. Mark Andrews, great option at the tight end position. And then our running back spot. It is going to be weak, but I do think we have some players who could kind of break out for us. Javonte Williams, if he's healthy, I think he's going to end up being a value. Zach Charbonnet, who knows how that Seahawks backfield shakes out, or an injury to Kenneth Walker could upgrade him. Damian Harris, who knows how that split shakes out. And then handcuffs with Jaylen Warren and Kendre Miller. Injuries happen to the guys ahead of them. They become startable options. So that is going to be our first mock draft. Now moving into the second one, this is also going to be PPR scoring. It's going to be from the 4 spot, but I changed up the roster construction a little bit. It's still going to be, 1 quarterback, 1 tight end, 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers, but I just added another flex spot to kind of shake it up a little bit. So from the 104 spot, we start off with Tyreek Hill. This could have been wide receiver. This could have been running back. It could have been Eckler. It could have been Bijan. It could have been Cooper Kupp. I've talked, pretty heavily all offseason about how I feel like that tier with Bijan, Eckler, Hill, Cooper Kupp, you can go whatever way you want. So maybe in a different draft I'd go running back, but since this is 0 RB, we go with wide receiver, and I don't think it's like, terrible value to go with Tyreek Hill. Then in the second round, we get a falling Devontae Adams at the 209, so I'll definitely take him there all day long. If he's going to fall there, he's someone I'd take at the 1-2 turn, so really like him at that price. And then we get a round 3 Mark Andrews, which pretty much Andrews anywhere in round 3 is someone I'm going to be super interested in for fantasy, and he's going to slot in to be our elite tight end option. Then in round 4 on the way back, like I've talked about, I really never liked the value of running back in round 4, so I go with Justin Fields to be our elite quarterback option, and then I hammer the wide receiver position from rounds 5 through round 7, go Christian Watson, then Mike Williams, then Deontay Johnson. So now we have wide receivers through our flex right now, since we can start 5 in this format. And since there is an extra wide receiver spot, I think this is where we kind of start to get serious about the running back position. And since we can start 5 different wide receivers in this roster format, I'm not just going to continue to hammer the wide receiver position and just totally pass up on these running backs. So in 6 of the next 7 rounds, we hit up the running back position. Some familiar faces from the last draft. So I go with Antonio Gibson in round 8. To be totally honest, I don't have a ton of Antonio Gibson. I don't draft him a lot, but I think this is a decently fair price. He fits that like ambiguous backfield situation where who knows what's going to happen with the Commanders there. Then we go Zach Charbonnet again, Damian Harris again, like those 2 options. Then we go Rashad Bateman in round 11. I think, those 9, 10, 11 picks were the same from the last draft, but if Bateman's going to be our wide receiver 6 and we're getting him in round 11, I think it makes sense. And then we just fire a bunch of darts. Jaylen Warren, Roschon Johnson, Zamir White. I think Zamir White is a super interesting option in 0 RB drafts, just because if he can carve out that backup role to Josh Jacobs, we don't know what's going on with this Josh Jacobs contract. He may miss time early in the season, which could make Zamir White a starter, and he could also miss time late in the season if he just decides to wrap it up, which could make Zamir White very, very valuable for the fantasy playoffs. So that's going to be our mock from the 4th pick. Once again, wide receiver super solid, right? Mike Williams, who I view as a top 20 wide receiver. He's our wide receiver 4. Deontay, our number 5. Strong quarterback, strong tight end. Obviously, the running back position, that's the weak spot, but that's kind of comes with the territory with the 0 RB draft strategy. Now, the next mock is going to be from the 7th pick, and we're going back to the first roster construction, so just 2 flex spots in this one. And honestly, this is one of the favorite mock drafts I've done, throughout all of these videos. Double Hero RB, Hero RB. I really, really like the way this one played out. And I think I just have to emphasize, right? I never forced these picks. These are like the value picks when I was up. These are the guys I liked. And it turned into a really stacked roster, which is how a lot of your 0 RB teams should be. Because if you don't go in thinking 0 RB, you just go best player available through the first, 3, 4, 5 rounds, and then you play it out from there. That's what happened in this one, and I really like the way this one played out. So we had the 107 spot. I go with Cooper Kupp here at the 107. We get Devontae Adams in the mid-second. I'll take him again at that price. I would take him 1-2 turn, like I said. So if I get a mid-round 2, I love it. Mark Andrews at the 307. This is a spot where I could have gone with Breece Hall, and typically I'd be very cool taking Breece Hall in the mid-third. But if Mark Andrews is going to fall there, I'm going to take him. I'm not going to force the running back pick. Then we get a falling Calvin Ridley in round 4. That's 3 straight rounds with like some pretty decent falling from these guys, like at least a half round slip in terms of their ADP. And so I'm not going to force another position. I'm going to take the value. And then we get another faller in round 5 with Justin Fields. So through 3 rounds, we have 3 wide receivers that I view as top 13 wide receivers. We have an elite tight end, the tight end 2 overall, and then we have my my quarterback 5 in Justin Fields. In round 6, we get Mike Williams, who I love in these drafts, to be our wide receiver 4. And then in round 7, this is a spot where we can start to consider our first running back, and that's where I go with David Montgomery. I think he's someone who can be a really solid RB1 on a 0 RB team if you're able to get him in round 7. I think he has weekly value, and then he also has that upside if Jahmyr Gibbs ever goes down with injury. Round 8, we go with Quentin Johnston to be our wide receiver 5. Get Rashad Penny in round 9. I don't typically have a ton of Rashad Penny shares. I don't hit the draft button on him a ton, but I do think it makes sense to get some exposure to him just because if he does end up being the lead back for the Eagles, he will be super valuable. Another kind of ambiguous situation where he could have some upside. Round 10, we go with Cortland Sutton. And then in the next 3 rounds, just hammer out these handcuffs. Elijah Mitchell, Tank Bigsby, Jaylen Warren. So once again, reviewing the draft, these wide receivers are absolutely stacked. Cooper Kupp, Devontae Adams, Calvin Ridley, Mike Williams in our starting lineup. Quentin Johnston, Cortland Sutton, solid depth. Justin Fields, love him at the quarterback position. Mark Andrews, obviously love him at tight end. And then I think we have one solid weekly starter in David Montgomery. And then it's just going to be rotating that RB2 spot. If Rashad Penny's the guy with the Eagles, cool. Maybe it's a CMC injury, an ETN injury, a Najee injury that plugs one of these other guys into our lineup. But I really do like the way this one played out. And it's just because we didn't force anything at the running back position, right? In rounds 4 or 5, I could have forced an Aaron Jones pick. I could have forced a DeAndre Swift pick. But it just doesn't make sense to pass up on that value in other positions. Now, the next mock draft is going to be PPR from the 9 spot. And we're going back to the 3 flex. So 2 wide receivers, 3 flex options. So we want 5 wide receivers through that flex. The 109, I've talked about it. I don't love this draft position. I have a top 7. None of those top 7 make it back to me. So Stephon Diggs is my best player available at the 109. So I go with Stephon Diggs. Then in round 2, I go with Amon-Ra St. Brown, who is someone I would take at the 1-2 turn. I like the value here in round 2. Then in round 3, I typically would go Calvin Ridley, but I go Calvin Ridley in a lot of these mock drafts, so I ended up going with Devonta Smith. And then we get into round 4, which is where I go with Amari Cooper to slot into our second flex spot. And then we go into round 5, and I just hammer out another wide receiver. I think if you were in a league where you could only start 4 wide receivers with this format, I think you would kind of be in a tough spot here because you would end up, having to take a bench option in your first 5 rounds, or you would have to force a quarterback or tight end pick. But I was able to be more flexible at the wide receiver position because we could start 5. If this was starting only 2 flexes, I probably would have considered Justin Fields over Amari Cooper in that spot. So definitely something to keep in mind there. But through 5 rounds, we have wide receivers through our flex. And I will say we got kind of fortunate here because if Trevor Lawrence went at that 5-6 turn and he didn't make it to us here at the 604, I think we would have been in a tough spot. I guess we could have drafted a running back here, but it probably would have been a forced pick. But fortunately, Trevor Lawrence falls here to like the mid-6th round area, so we snag him. Looking back on it, it probably would have made sense to go Ridley over Devonta Smith because we would have got that stack, but obviously we didn't know it when we made that pick. So we go Trevor Lawrence in round 6, and then going into round 7, this is a spot where we probably want to get our first running back. We had Javonte and Rachaad White go right before us, so kind of made the decision easy to go with David Montgomery here to be our running back 1. And then in round 8, we actually kind of get a decent tight end value. Evan Ingram falls to us. We didn't get an early round tight end, and then we have the stack option with Trevor Lawrence. So I think that tight end spot made sense. Round 9, we go with Zay Flowers as some wide receiver depth. Go to the wide receiver position with Devin Achane, a guy in an ambiguous situation who could break out as the running back one, especially if the Dolphins don't bring in Dalvin Cook. We get Rashad Bateman round 11. I will always be going after Rashad Bateman in round 11. And then just hammer out some handcuff options: Tank Bigsby, Roshan Johnson, Tajay Spears. So, once again, wide receiver position, super, super strong. Two guys that I have in my top 6 wide receivers, I believe. We have a nice fringe wide receiver 1, and then Amari Cooper is a mid-tier wide receiver 2. Christian Watson, a guy I have in my top 24. So 5 top 24 wide receivers that we're starting week to week. A solid mid-tier quarterback option, decent back-end tight end, and then obviously the running back position is a little bit of the issue, but a spot that could kind of upgrade throughout the season with injuries to other workhorses. Now moving into the 5th and final mock draft, this is going to be from the 12 spot, and I think the 12 spot, similar to the number 1 pick, is a spot where you could execute 0 RB, just depending on how you view the turn. Because I think in a lot of drafts, when you're picking at the 1-2 turn, you have a lot of options. You can go wide receiver. You can go running back. You can go one of each. But if you are someone who likes the value on wide receiver, I think once you get back to rounds 3 and 4, the running back position may already be gone. And I feel like, that decision kind of may be made for you. So keep that in mind. But this is going back to the 2 flex options. So 2 wide receivers, 2 flexes. And with our 1-2 turn picks, we go CeeDee Lamb and Amon-Ra St. Brown. You could definitely consider Nick Chubb here. I honestly think in a PPR draft, I probably would just straight up go CeeDee Lamb and Amon-Ra. So we get those 2 guys to lead our wide receiver position. Then we get back to the 3-4 turn, and guys that I would consider at this spot at the running back position: Ramondre, Breece Hall, Jahmyr Gibbs. Those guys are all off the board. I know some people would go Travis Etienne here. I'm just not super bought in on Travis Etienne, to be totally honest with you guys. So 3-4 turn, I go Calvin Ridley and I go Keenan Allen. We have wide receivers locked in through our flex and some really, really solid options. 3 top 13 guys in my rankings, and then 1 mid-tier wide receiver 2. Then at the 5-6 turn, we hit up the quarterback and the tight end position. We go Trevor Lawrence in round 5, Darren Waller in round 6. So far we have our entire starting lineup filled out, minus the running back positions. We have solid options at quarterback and tight end, and then stacked at wide receiver. Round 7, I didn't really love 2 running backs here. This was a spot where we could have double tapped running back. I just don't think it made sense. James Cook was the only guy I liked at this spot. Didn't want to go around early round 8 Dylan or Gibson, Montgomery, Javonte. Those guys were off the board. So I go Jordan Addison at wide receiver to get depth there. And then I go with James Cook in the 8th round. Round 9, got to go with Elijah Moore. The value is just too good. And then we also get Khalil Herbert at that turn. Khalil Herbert dominated the snaps with the starters in the preseason game. Obviously, I think Roshan Johnson could still expand his role, all of that stuff, but another ambiguous situation where if Khalil Herbert is the clear-cut lead back, he will be valuable for the Bears. And then we just, fire off these darts at the running back position: Tyler Algier, Tank Bigsby, and Tajay Spears. So another draft that I think honestly looks decent, right? James Cook, Khalil Herbert, these guys could break out in their backfields. Bunch of depth options. And then I think our wide receivers are also really solid, with Jordan Addison and Elijah Moore as our wide receiver 5 and 6. Starters are pretty solid here. So that is going to wrap it up for the 5 mock drafts. If you guys did stick out, watch the entire video, and you came into it not being a fan of 0 RB, first off, I definitely appreciate it. And what are you guys thinking? Like I said, this is not something I execute personally a ton, just because I will not force myself into it. If there is a running back I like in the first 1, 2, 3 rounds, I will draft them. I'm not going to fade off of them, but I think you are going to be stuck in spots if you're in a league where everyone's just so hungry to get those running backs, right? And everyone is pushed up. You're going to see that Chubb, Pollard, Henry tier all picked in the first half of the 2nd round. I do think it could make sense if you have the flex options available, to start wide receivers, that it is something you should just consider in your fantasy drafts. So how are we feeling about this draft strategy? Let me know down below. If you enjoyed the video, do me a huge favor, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Thank you all for stopping by, and I will see you in the next one.